Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
Good morning and welcome to today's episode. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and each day I invite you to join me as we reflect on a significant moment from our shared past. Today is November 6th, and we're looking back 39 years to November 6th, 1986. On that day, a small Lebanese magazine called Ash-Shara published an explosive story. The United States had been secretly selling weapons to Iran. This revelation would unravel into one of the biggest political scandals of the 1980s, the Iran-Contra affair. What began with arms sales to a hostile nation would expose an elaborate scheme to illegally fund anti-communist rebels in Central America, would lead to congressional hearings watched by millions, and would raise fundamental questions about presidential power, government accountability, and how far administrations can go in the name of national security. The scandal would shadow Ronald Reagan's second term and establish patterns of executive secrecy that continue to shape American politics today. To understand Iran-Contra, we need to understand Ronald Reagan's worldview in the 1980s. Reagan saw the Cold War in stark moral terms. The Soviet Union was an evil empire, and America had a duty to resist communist expansion everywhere. This anti-communist crusade shaped his administration's foreign policy, sometimes in ways that bent or broke the law. In Nicaragua, a Marxist revolutionary group called the Sandinistas had overthrown a right-wing dictatorship in 1979. The Reagan administration viewed the Sandinista government as a Soviet beachhead in Central America, threatening to spread communism throughout the region. Reagan authorized support for the Contras, counter-revolutionary rebels fighting to overthrow the Sandinistas. The CIA armed them, trained them, and coordinated their operations. But Congress grew uncomfortable with this proxy war. Reports of Contra human rights abuses emerged. The conflict seemed endless and expensive. In 1982, and then more forcefully in 1984, Congress passed the Boland Amendments, explicitly prohibiting the U.S. government from providing military aid to the Contras. The law was clear. No federal funds could be used to support the Nicaraguan rebels. Reagan and his national security team faced a dilemma. They believed supporting the Contras was vital to American interests, but Congress had cut off funding. What they decided to do next would become one of the most significant constitutional crises of the modern presidency. The solution was breathtakingly audacious and clearly illegal. If Congress wouldn't provide funds, the administration would find money elsewhere and use it secretly. The scheme had two components that eventually connected. First, there was Iran. Despite Reagan's public stance against negotiating with terrorists, his administration desperately wanted to free American hostages held by Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iranian-backed Hezbollah held the hostages, and moderates within Iran's government suggested they could help. But Iran, at war with Iraq, needed weapons. Weapons that the U.S. officially refused to sell to this hostile nation that had humiliated America just years earlier during the hostage crisis. National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane and his deputy, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, orchestrated a plan. Sell weapons to Iran through intermediaries at inflated prices. Iran would use its influence to free the hostages. The profits from these arms sales, money above what the weapons cost, would be secretly diverted to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. It was elegant in its complexity and catastrophic in its illegality. The administration was selling arms to a hostile nation, negotiating with terrorists despite saying they never would, and using the proceeds to fund a rebel army that Congress had explicitly prohibited them from supporting. Between 1985 and 1986, the operation proceeded in secret. Weapons flowed to Iran through Israeli and then direct channels. Money flowed from the sales to secret accounts. Some of that money funded the Contras. Hostages were occasionally released, though new ones were captured, proving that negotiating with terrorists merely encourages more hostage-taking. On November 6, 1986, everything began to unravel. The Lebanese magazine Ash-Shira published the story based on Iranian sources. America was selling weapons to Iran. Within days, Iranian officials confirmed it. The Reagan administration, caught completely off guard, scrambled to respond. At first, Reagan denied everything. Then he admitted to the arms sales, but claimed they weren't ransom for hostages. They were part of an opening to Iranian moderates. Few people believed this. The timeline was too convenient. Weapons shipped, hostages released, more weapons shipped. It looked exactly like arms for hostages, which was exactly what it was. But the full scandal hadn't emerged yet. On November 25th, Attorney General Edwin Meese held a shocking press conference. He revealed that funds from the Iranian arms sales had been diverted to support the Contras. This wasn't just about arms sales to a hostile nation or negotiating with terrorists. It was about circumventing Congress and violating the law. The political explosion was immediate. Democrats were outraged that the administration had defied congressional restrictions. Republicans were dismayed that Reagan, their champion, had been caught in an illegal scheme. The press frenzy was relentless. Congressional investigations began immediately. The public face of Iran-Contra became Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, a Marine officer working on the National Security Council staff. North had coordinated much of the operation, working long hours managing arms shipments, Contra funding, and communication with Iranian intermediaries. When the scandal broke, North and his secretary shredded documents frantically before investigators could seize them. In July 1987, North testified before Congress in televised hearings watched by millions. Wearing his Marine uniform with combat ribbons, North was defiant, patriotic, and unapologetic. He admitted coordinating the operations, but insisted he was following orders and acting in America's interests. He portrayed himself as a loyal soldier, doing what his superiors wanted while they maintained plausible deniability. North's testimony was electrifying television. Some Americans saw him as a hero, a patriot, unfairly scapegoated for doing what needed to be done. Others saw him as proof that the Reagan administration had operated a shadow government, breaking laws while claiming ignorance. North received both death threats and marriage proposals. His lawyer became a celebrity. The hearings became a national obsession. The central question was, what did President Reagan know, and when did he know it? Reagan claimed he'd authorized arms sales to Iran, but had no knowledge of funds being diverted to the Contras. Critics found this implausible. How could such a major operation proceed without presidential knowledge? But investigators couldn't prove Reagan knew. His subordinates, particularly North, protected him by taking responsibility themselves. 14 administration officials were eventually indicted. 11 were convicted, though many convictions were later overturned on technicalities or were pardoned by President George H.W. Bush in 1992. Oliver North's conviction was vacated because his testimony before Congress, given under immunity, had tainted his trial. Reagan's presidency survived but damaged. His approval ratings dropped sharply. The scandal dominated his second term, distracting from his policy agenda. The image of Reagan as the Teflon president, to whom no scandal stuck, was permanently tarnished. Though he remained personally popular, Iran-Contra showed that his administration had engaged in serious wrongdoing. More importantly, Iran-Contra raised profound constitutional questions about executive power. Can a president ignore laws passed by Congress if he believes national security requires it? Can the executive branch run covert operations that Congress explicitly prohibits? Who watches the watchers? The Reagan administration's position was essentially that when it comes to foreign policy and national security, the president has inherent powers that Congress cannot restrict. This view of expansive executive authority would reappear in later administrations, particularly regarding the war on terror after 9/11. Iran-Contra established a template for executive branch secrecy that persists today. When administrations want to pursue policies they know Congress or the public won't support, they use covert operations, plausible deniability, and layers of intermediaries. They classify documents. They claim national security concerns. They structure operations so that if things go wrong, lower-level officials take the fall while senior leaders maintain they didn't know. We've seen this pattern repeatedly. The torture program after 9/11, secret surveillance programs, drone strikes. Each time, the executive branch claims these actions are legal, necessary, and that congressional and public oversight would compromise national security. Each time, we learn years later that what was done in our name was more extensive and more questionable than we were told. Iran-Contra also demonstrated that even serious government wrongdoing rarely produces lasting accountability. Yes, officials were indicted, but convictions were overturned and pardons issued. No senior officials went to prison. The lesson for future administrations was clear. You can bend or break the law in the name of national security, and if caught, the consequences are manageable. What does November 6, 1986 teach us about government accountability, executive power, and covert operations? First, when administrations operate in secret, they inevitably go too far. The Iran-Contra affair started from a genuine foreign policy concern, the Cold War and hostages, but expanded into an illegal scheme precisely because it operated without oversight. Secrecy enables excess. Covert operations drift toward illegality when there's no one watching. Second, national security can justify almost anything if we let it. The Reagan administration broke the law and then claimed they did so for national security reasons. This argument has justified torture, warrantless surveillance, and indefinite detention in later years. National security is a real concern, but it can't be a blank check for the executive branch to do whatever it wants. Third, accountability remains elusive even when wrongdoing is exposed. Despite investigations, hearings, and convictions, Iran-Contra's key architects faced minimal consequences. This sends a message that executives can violate the law and expect to escape serious punishment, especially if they can claim patriotic motives. Finally, Congress's power to check the executive branch depends on whether it's willing to fight for that power. Congress passed the Boland Amendments specifically to stop Contra funding. The Reagan administration defied those laws. Congress held hearings, but ultimately didn't pursue accountability aggressively enough to deter future abuses. When Congress doesn't defend its constitutional role, the executive branch expands to fill the vacuum. So that's November 6th, 1986, the day a Lebanese magazine exposed America's secret arms sales to Iran, triggering a scandal that revealed an elaborate scheme to fund Nicaraguan rebels in defiance of congressional law. A scandal that led to Oliver North in his Marine uniform testifying before Congress, shredding documents while claiming he was just following orders. A scandal that showed how far an administration will go when it operates in secret and believes the ends justify the means. The Iran-Contra affair damaged Reagan's presidency, but didn't destroy it. More importantly, it established patterns of executive secrecy, plausible deniability, and resistance to accountability that continue today. When we hear about covert operations, secret surveillance, or actions taken in the name of national security without congressional knowledge, we're seeing Iran-Contra's legacy. The great philosopher George Santayana once wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." The lesson of Iran-Contra isn't just that this particular scandal happened. It's that when governments operate without transparency, when executives defy legislative restrictions in the name of national security, when accountability remains elusive even after exposure, we invite future abuses. Democracy requires oversight, transparency, and consequences. Iran-Contra showed what happens when those safeguards fail. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Richard Backus, and I'll be back tomorrow with another story from our shared past.